Scott Meter, Fair Manager.
Barb Nealon, Missoula Convention and Visitors Bureau. Kim Clegans-Johns, J. Lane's Boutique, Missoula Downtown Association.
Bill Carey, County Commissioner.
Chris Snyder, Jason Erickson, Treasure State Bank. Tim Winger, South Cape Mall, Missoula Midtown Association.
Kim McCall Chamber. Carrie Nelson, Missoula Redevelopment Agency.
Jeremy Keane, WGM Group, Missoula Midtown South Fashion.
Bob McHugh, Eagle Self Storage, and Missoula Midtown Association.
Okay. Jason Graff with Crandall Arambula.
And Larry.
Anderson, County Commissioner.
And Don is here somewhere. He'll show up. Typically what we have been doing is have a quick presentation, just giving people some sense of what this study is all about, what the schedule is about, and then we just need to hear from you. That's the most interesting part of the session. So why don't I just start off with let's see, which one is easiest to use? This one. Can we use this one?
We don't have the computer hooked up to that one.
Oh, so we are up here. I was
Yeah,
telling
we
you.
need to move that after this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, because we did have a computer down here before. So I'll run up here and go through this rather quickly. And feel free to interrupt, and if you have any questions or something isn't clear. And let's see if this one will go. Jason, do you want to get on the hit button there? Because this doesn't seem to be working. Okay. And so we want to identify your issues and concerns. That's what this session is all about. Let's try that. You want to go. So you want to hit that again. I'm not sure whether we have there we go, right there. And of course, here we are, and you know where we are. Study area then is shown here in the red line, and the fairgrounds, the high school, the park, and the elementary school. That's the study area, but we will be looking beyond that to see how this area connects to the neighborhood. The project purpose then summarized here. And whatever comes up, whatever we all end up with has to be financially sustainable. Bingo. Why don't we just... And we have a response sheet which we would like you all to fill out, list your top 3 issues and concerns. Jason, do we have enough to pass around?
I do. I'll pass those around.
Okay, that's good. Let's try this. Oh, there we go. And of course, we're a small firm out of Portland. We worked with you on your downtown, and we work around the country and in Canada revitalizing cities. We have completed some, and of course worked with you on your downtown. That effort is just we're just finishing that up. We have worked on fairgrounds. This is the Salem Fairgrounds in Oregon, a master plan for that facility. Many issues similar to what you have here. I think it may be that this little arrow moves away, Jason, and that may be there we go. The process summarized here is starting in a designing piece. We're in the starting phase. The schedule then looks like this. Can you?
It keeps coming back.
There we go. Here we are then in the starting phase. The idea is to identify the opportunities and constraints associated with this site, to take that information and then come back to you, do some design work, come back to you with some alternatives. We'll develop alternatives, come back to you in a few months then with those alternatives for your review and comment. To take that information, to refine an alternative, and then finally to come back with a preferred alternative. So we go from the general to the very specific. Now, there is another piece which would follow. It's an optional piece, and that's to look at a new fairground site, very separate from what we're looking at here. That process then would follow same steps, going from the very general to the very specific, to come back then, or over the next 4 months when we finish looking at this site, with some possibilities then for the new site. I think I'll give up on this, Jason. I think
You press it and I'll bring it.
you'll press it both at the same time. All right. And we take a look at all the good work that has been accomplished related to this site over time. And for example, we go back to the 1989 Fairgrounds Plan. Now, the assumptions at that time are different than the assumptions now, but their ideas are in, and that plan contains information. It's always useful. Then in 2004, there was a Parks Plan. We'll review that, and it looks something like this. Some improvements were suggested. Why don't I just have you do that? I think it's less disruptive. And then there was a plan in 2007 that looked at an exhibition hall in this location. Now, this wasn't a preferred one. There were 3 concepts. We'll review those. Let's keep rolling. There was a Central Park concept. We've taken a look at that, and we'll be meeting with the Central Park people today to get additional information. There were some key ideas that came out of that. They're listed right here. We'll pay attention to those. Then we go back to the existing conditions, and we need to pay attention to what is around the edges. The major auto routes, how do you access the site? How do you get into the site? As you know, it isn't at least something to be desired today. We're always interested in the traffic volumes on the adjacent streets to identify whether there are issues that we need to deal with as we develop a master plan, and how those turning movements work, how you get into the site, and are there things that we need to address in that master plan. The existing bus routes are important. The bike routes, the zoning, let's go, and the urban renewal area. The urban renewal area, here's our study area, of course. The urban renewal area then is in red, when you have an urban renewal area, you often see a lot of redevelopment in the area over time. You often have funds to do that. And so we will be very interested in looking at how this area might develop over time. Now, we're not going to do a lot of work here, but we will make some assumptions about what will happen in that urban renewal area and how it then might connect to the fairground site. We have looked at the fairgrounds, and will look at the fairgrounds uses that you have today and make some assumptions then about how that might change over time using the information that we're picking up over the next few days. And so here we are then to hear about your issues and concerns, your thoughts about what should happen.
Jason, what's the Newtown one with the whole urban renewal back?
So, any questions about the process, or or comments about what you'd like to see? What we're eventually going to do is go around the table, by the way, and hear from everyone here. Get your thoughts about what we're doing and how we can do it better. Yeah.
George, you talked in your presentation about 2 separate issues, one dealing with the fairground here and another one the possibility of another site.
Yes.
Will part of your process be then to bring those 2 back together?
Yes.
Or will those be 2 separate?
No, we'll bring them back together. Because that, certainly the issues come up, well, is it in the right place? And if it wasn't here, what would be here? So we really have to bring them back together so that you can make that decision. Other questions? So let me just hear from all of you about your issues and what you would like to see in this study or any advice you have for us. So why don't I start? We start on this end. Any thoughts you have about this? Questions? And then we'll just run right around.
Well, I guess my interest is how is traffic going to be dealt with in this, whole area of Missoula, and how the fairgrounds, a new plan for the fairgrounds in this area is going to impact that. There's been a number of things that have been discussed over the years about traffic. Pull the fairgrounds and put it in another location out at the fort, leave it here, get rid of racing, expand Stevens Avenue so that Stevens flows all the way through rather than to have it stop and start, create some kind of creative means of getting traffic. And I guess if that happens, if we can figure out an appropriate traffic pattern for this piece of ground, like expanding Stevens or something like that, I think this piece of property has a life. But if we don't get this traffic issue figured out around this piece of property, then we're just doomed for more. I mean, what do we want to do? Attract more people, but we haven't figured out parking, we haven't figured out traffic. I've worked on parking, as many of you know. I've worked on parking at this fairgrounds for 20 years for the fair. I mean, I've stood at the front gate for 20 years, taking tickets, taking money, listening to people bitch at me about why it's too expensive, how come there isn't more parking. So I know that that's got to be one of the prime things that we've got to consider is traffic flow and parking in order to get people in and out of this facility to enjoy it.
What is the parking fee?
This year it was $5, and it's been $2 for many, many years. And I don't know, Scott, are we going to up it this year? Scott here?
He was, yeah.
Yeah. So, but and it's a pretty reasonable. And then you also have parking. You have little lots around here that charge maybe $1 less than that, but they're not very big lots.
Okay, tell us about people trying to get into the site. What is the
Well, everybody would like to park right out there.
Right.
That's where everybody would like to be.
Sure.
And the number of handicapped people in the last 10 years has grown exponentially. And so the ability to park those handicapped people is challenging at some point. And so you just have to be really on your game every morning to make sure that things are laid out right in that dirt lot out there so that you can get cars in evenly and you can get enough spots for handicap. So I just know that those are big issues. And
Sure. And then access from the roadways coming in here, we've driven around and it appears to be confusing and difficult, but what's the public's perception of driving to the site and being able to get in the front door here?
Well, the front door is here, so that's always the big cluster. And if you look, there really isn't a very good pull-through lane for people to pull over and drop their kids off. So what we get is we get people that just pull in and say, hi, I'm just dropping off my kids, which clogs up this artery. And we try to keep this one way so we don't have this traffic, because it's a real danger to try and get traffic to pull out onto South Avenue. So we pull them through on a one-way, and so we try to figure out immediately what it is that they want. Well, I want a parking space. Okay, we've got one over here. Or I'm just dropping off my 90-year-old mother because she can't walk.
Yeah.
So we get them to the front gate, and so that becomes a cluster up there. And so the challenge is for that person at that front gate to make sure they understand what they want, get them unloaded or get them pulled over to the side. And again, there isn't a good place to pull somebody over to the side. There's lots of nice lawn along here and trees, but there isn't a good place to pull a bus that came from one of the nursing homes or one of the handicap centers. So to me, that, and it can be done. I'm very confident that it can be done. We just all need to be on the same page to make sure that we address that, because when that traffic gets jammed up, it gets real interesting.
I bet.
So, but I do think that a one-way is really important if we are funneling traffic off of South Avenue and going out that direction. Because if you try to get two-way traffic out of here, it's just too, well, now it's too much of a cluster.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
We've had a number of discussions at the Midtown Association about the fairgrounds, and I think one of the things that we really focused on is that this is an important piece of public ground in this area. And as Midtown redevelops and the various scenarios for Midtown, include a housing component, we think that a public open space is an important part of that, and so the fairgrounds could provide that function. I think the other thing we've talked about a lot is that facility, if it were more of a year-round public use type facility, would be a real benefit to the area. And we've, that would include things like year-round event centers and things like that, part of our discussion. So one of the big things that we've sort of had objections to at the fairgrounds is that its lack of, it doesn't engage the street well. It's very internalized. It has a barbed wire fence around the outside. I think that's very much of a barrier and a separation from the rest of the area around it. And then I want to echo Bob's comments about the traffic a little bit. There's an access problem in and out of the fairgrounds. My kids play hockey at the rink, and we're in and out of here half dozen times a week, and getting in and out of there just on the regular day for hockey is sort of awkward. And then if you go to the Maulers games, the hockey games, it's a real mess with the traffic getting in and out for those games. So, having a good access in and out of the fairgrounds is important. But then the other thing is the traffic flow and circulation around the fairgrounds, around Brooks South Russell, because of the turning restrictions, it creates some problems there. And we've thought that for a long time that connecting Stevens over to Fairview, which would be a kind of a 90-degree bend, would provide that added network of streets that would allow people to circulate around the Brooks South Russell intersection without having to make left turns through it. So some kind of consideration of how traffic can move through the fairgrounds with maybe times during events where you would close that street, but when there's not events happening, that you would have just a regular public street that can function for more of the overall circulation in the area.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Being from the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, obviously we're interested in how, as you mentioned, how the fairgrounds interacts with the urban renewal district. There was a lot of discussion when we created the urban renewal district whether or not to include the fairgrounds. And I think there was a lot of people that were interested in including it, or at least recognize that its proximity and its importance to the urban renewal district, and vice versa. We ended up not including it. I think part of the sentiment was that we could spend a lot of money on just the fairgrounds if it was part of the urban renewal district. And it also had, at that time, it had its own planning efforts were already underway. So that was another reason to not necessarily include it. But as you mentioned, it's obvious whatever goes on at the fairgrounds is going to impact the urban renewal district. And hopefully we can go the other way. If we can get some things going in the urban renewal district, we can help facilitate maybe and impact the fairgrounds as well.
Okay, thank you.
George,
Yeah.
what is this URD 4? 3? When does it sunset?
I believe it sunsets in we've been at it for about 5 years, so we've got about 10 years unless some bonds are sold, so we've got some time, and we've got some money too. So,
And are there any projects right now that are in the...
not large ones. We're looking at the area south of the mall. We've done some planning efforts with stuff that's going on with that vacant area south of the mall. But there's nothing, no checks have been written. But there's some smaller projects going on, but
Do you have a project
nothing major.
list?
Yeah, and it's very small. It's just some specific businesses is all. But yeah, I can get that.
Oh, yeah.
And when you say you have some money, how much money is some money?
I don't recall exactly how much, but there's we've been collecting it for about 5 years, and the bank is a large contributor that came online after the project was started. But I think there's probably 1.5 million or so. Yeah.
Enough to do a project.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
You heard a lot from me the first hour, so I'll keep this brief. Representing the Missoula Chamber and representing the businesses in this entire city, county, and region. And so I'm here honestly just listening to all the groups that are here about their thoughts. But I did want a couple of, when I look at here, you list some top issues. I guess a couple things that I just like to make sure that is on the table is that there are some associations and nonprofits that make their revenue one time a year at the fair that carries them all year long. And those monies go back into this community for a variety of needs. And so besides just having a great entertainment value, the fairgrounds provides revenue to some of those organizations that have no other way of getting it. And that is a huge part of our community, is that ability to give. So that's just one thing that I wanted to make sure that is on the table, because it sometimes gets forgotten.
Thank you.
I'm a part of the Missoula Midtown Association. I've sort of been a part of it since its inception. And, it's a group made up of many businesses in the Midtown area, not-for-profits, churches, neighborhood associations. We have councilmen and county employees regularly participate in our meetings. So there's a lot of interest in the Midtown area. And we first kind of became interested or pointed toward this process when the Medicine Hat fair presentation came from the fair board, and so we're really interested in the viability and the location and condition of the fair. Those were issues that sort of were emerged in the last year as far as the group being aware of them. Because I know they've been around, those issues have been around for a while, and Scott's been a great supporter of our group as well, so we've interacted very much. But that Medicine Hat presentation, I think the group became very interested in the concept of that. And I was educated this morning as I sat in on the first presentation in the difference between convention and exposition. And certainly that exposition concept is the one that we've as a group, said, hey, that's a good idea, and that'd be really good for the Midtown area. Being in the ERD 3, that was one of the reasons that formed this group together. If you drive up and down Brooks, you see the old buildings and the vacant buildings and the opportunities. I mean, we all look at this, and we have a pretty forward-thinking group that sees this area as a huge opportunity. And then when you start zeroing in on this piece of ground, the possibilities seem, there's an elevated amount of possibilities, we feel, especially when you start talking about making this a year-round proposition rather than maybe something, there. And I think it's a little bit unfair in supporting what happens here on the fairgrounds, saying that it's just 1 week a year here, because certainly they're bringing in, several events throughout the year that, you see spikes in the traffic here with dog shows and all the other things, rodeos and things that go on here. But just, you could see the possibilities of so much more. I have young kids, we're in strikers, we're in football, and Jeremy speaks of hockey and what a great scenario that's built here, that we see, this being sort of a mecca of hockey in 10 years of what started here already. So, we're real excited about all of that. When I got your sheet here, it was very easy for me to fill out. The fair staying put is something that we feel strongly about at the Midtown Association. We feel incorporating the Exposition Center is something that is very important to the viability for the county and the city of Missoula, making this piece of ground be a more productive. And then the aesthetic improvements of the ground, which Jeremy started. And, just a couple things that we've talked about is, obviously the fence is a huge issue, and then sort of making it inviting to the eye. We think that some of the old buildings could be very interesting components to the fair and an exposition center. The big barn building we see potentially is the entrance, the walk-in entrance of the facility. If it were, we see great big murals on the inside of it, and people walking through and just getting a taste of Montana or Missoula County or whatever as they walk into that thing. Can it be moved to a spot strategically? I don't know. Who knows? But it would be an interesting thing. And I know that there are people that are very concerned about some of the buildings and what happens to them, and we think that incorporating them would be an important part of the plan. We'd hate to see the fair go backwards and go somewhere else and be intense and, sort of start over in a lot of ways. We hate to see that happen. I think the other thing that we think that it could be a centerpiece, and I think when the Central Park people come in, it'll be very apparent. And I know you've seen what they've done already, but I think, they have made everybody that has seen their presentation understand the sort of opportunity that is sitting here with not only the ground here, but the public ground that's even around it, and that, this could be a special area, and, with the fairgrounds maybe as the anchor of it into the future as things change, because it's pretty rare that you have this public land this size sort of in the middle of town. And I say that cautiously because downtown's middle, but I think as things grow and you see the Bitterroot and you look at the county, this is a pretty accessible, interesting location for something that could happen here. I think I just wanted to make sure to just iterate what the group that I represent sort of feels. So that's what I
Thank you. Are there any big projects that we should be aware of that are going on in the Midtown at this point that might have might influence us?
Project? No, not on the
building
board
projects
right now. What I'd say is that I think things are percolating as far as the ERD goes, and I think you will. There's obviously potential and the opportunities there, and I think things are going to happen. And I'm associated with Southgate Mall too, and we're always looking into the future, and we have all sorts of drawings and plans, but they can't be called projects yet.
Okay. And we've looked at some studies, the Urban Land Institute study and some of the others, and so we're aware of that, but if anything comes up, let us know. Anything we should be aware of. We toured around the Southgate Mall area yesterday and walked through it to get a sense of what was going on. As we looked at most of the neighborhood, and
And it's a vibrant mall, and it's very supported by a very large geographic area. What I would say is that people do tend to travel and go to sporting events and do stay overnight, 2 and 3 nights. As a matter of fact, in this town, when they come and visit to either shop on Reserve, stop downtown, hit an event, it is very typical for a Carrie Underwood concert or a concert to happen on a Friday night and then a football game being on Saturday, and you get people from out of town staying for those 2 events.
Tim, I think also what is amazing about shopping in this town is that you can have a sold-out Grizzly game going on, 26,000 people in that stadium, and the mall parking lot's full. and other parking lots too, shopping. I mean, it just... to me, that's amazing.
But and you'll see Reserve traffic stacked up on that same day, and you'll see a vibrant, amount. And you guys, are very familiar with the downtown, so you know what's happening downtown at the same time that all this other stuff is going on. And it can't be just people from Missoula making this all happen. It's a large geographic area that is coming here to support regionally, because this is the mecca where medical, education, shopping, and culture sort of happen in western Montana.
So what's the area that you really kind of serve? You talk about Midtown. How would you describe that? Is it that urban renewal area generally, or is it any more neighborhood stuff too?
Yeah, I think when you start going east and west, you're going to go down Russell, and you're going to go up to probably Mount, all the way back down to up Upper Miller Creek Road, all the way down to there probably would be a corridor of Midtown that we see. So from Eagle Storage to Pierce Flooring Tile, and then you're going to go east and west, a mile probably.
Basically from the river, the Bitterroot River, going up to Pierce Flooring, and a big swath of that area.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm with the Missoula Midtown Association as well. I didn't mention that the first time around. The group's covered it pretty well. I guess the one thing I wanted to emphasize is that I think it's important that you guys and that we continue to look at not just the fairgrounds, but this entire piece of public ground, and kind of, I know the fairgrounds is the focal point, right now, but we've got all these different groups that are kind of doing their own thing with their own little section of this, larger piece, and it would be nice to kind of have some kind of overarching, vision or plan for this, this ground as a whole, and try to bring these different groups together, to try to, so they at least talk with each other about what they're doing and kind of have a vision for, the entire acreage.
And one thing I'd be remiss to say is it seems to be an overriding opinion of our group that affordable housing on this ground is not something that we would want to see.
Okay, correct. And why?
Because we support all the other things with zeal.
Okay.
I think maybe more pointedly on that is we don't think it's a good idea to sell the ground, that it's an important public asset.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions on the tech college? Are you aware of them maybe moving?
Oh yeah. Which, I think Central Park covers a lot of, possibilities as far as, this all staying public in some way, and the College of Technology moving to the South Campus is, something that's been talked about a lot the last couple of years. So I guess we'll find out if it gets funded in February. But
Is there a date? You said February?
well, I've heard that is one.
Well, when meeting with the administration, they told me that was a done deal. They were moving that to the South Campus, and the decision's been made as far as to when. I mean, I thought it was sooner than later, but they were...
They have the first phase is $30 million that they need appropriation from the legislature, which is not in the governor's budget at the moment. But when you say the decision is made,
So that's what they want to do.
It's just
Yeah.
it's a matter of
Yep.
how long it takes them.
Okay, thank you. Larry?
Yesterday, I made comments about the impact of the Erd 3 district on this site. And if in fact the fairground does stay here, there needs to be flexibility or adaptability built into the plan for the future of this that will accommodate whatever changes occur in this URD so that it can be compatible with those uses and not be in conflict with them. Whether it's noise, whether it's traffic patterns, whatever it may be, is going to have to be adaptable to whatever occurs here, because there's no identified major projects now, but who knows what will happen over the next 4 or 5 years. So I guess that would be the one. If in fact the site does remain in this spot, there needs to be some sort of ability to be flexible, given whatever surrounding uses tend to dominate the future of this area.
Okay, thank you.
I came to listen.
All right. Good task.
Well, Obviously, I'm here representing the Downtown Association to a certain degree and being a small business owner downtown. I guess what I would like to just reiterate with everyone else is to just try to maximize the use of what we can do with this piece of property, because right now it is completely underutilized. I'm one of the moms that takes their kids to Spokane and does the 3-day and drops a ton of money in other cities. And you know, Missoula has so much to offer, and I can't say enough as to how we need to figure out a way we can start getting some of these tournaments here, some of these basketball tournaments, AAU tournaments, soccer, volleyball, basketball, however you want to look at it, because it's a financial coup across the board. And I mean, I think all the warm fuzzy, we want public land, and I think that's great, and there's no question that having this central park and utilizing it and aesthetically improving it and making it, you know, open land that has a beautiful park for people to enjoy is great. But I think we definitely need to look at how we can get Missoula on the map to be able to take care of what I consider a huge need from 7-year-olds up to high school seniors.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. As you guys know, I represent tourism in the city of Missoula, and you know from our downtown discussions that it is a huge economic driver for Missoula. You know, it brings in over $300 million a year into this economy, as is right now. And it has the potential to grow exponentially. One of the things that we do not have is the capacity to hold the larger events. And so, you know, Kim did a beautiful job in talking to you in the last hour about what the need is for an all-event center. And so I'm not going to reiterate all of that. We all, you know, we are a member of the coalition, and we'll be working with her and with all of the other organizations to try and make this happen. And one of the discussions that you were having in the last hour was, and Georgie did a great job of discussing the differences between a convention center, a conference center, and an all-events center. And it is an important issue to understand. I have done some research, and I've been speaking to, we're very fortunate to have a branch office of PKF in Bozeman, and they are one of the largest hospitality research companies in the country. They actually are an international company. The principal at that office in Bozeman, Chris Kraus, is also the principal of the San Francisco office. And in briefly talking to him about this concept, his feeling was very much that Missoula is a tertiary market at best right now for conferences and conventions. We all know that. We have a lot of issues and demographics that need to be worked out before that grows. But his feeling was that with the flexibility of an all-event center, that it was a possibility and something that we should definitely look into. You were discussing in the previous hour where we were going with what type of facility and how large we were looking at and things like that. And in truth, you know, I think it's very important that a feasibility study be done on this to truly understand what our market is. The market has changed a lot, even in just the last, 2 to 3 months with what's happened with the economy. They do those feasibility studies. They would be interested in doing it for us. And that feasibility study would cover everything from the demand for the type of facility. It would give us use projections, it would give us our market capture, and it would also give us our facility configuration based on what our demand is. They would also do a cash flow analysis for us, and also financing options and sources of that financing. So it would be fairly all-encompassing. they're willing to do it for a pretty reasonable price. And I think that that's something that we really, I think that's one of those next step things. Until we get the coalition all together and everybody has a chance to sit down and talk, of course, we don't know exactly what that next step is. But I think that's an important key. And I would hope that maybe we could start down that road in conjunction with what you are doing here, so that you do have the answers to the questions that you need about demand and size, so that you can understand what its fit would be for this piece of property. We think that this is a great location for what we're looking at. It doesn't mean it's probably the only location, though. And so I think if we can get those answers, and I don't know what is your timeline that you're looking at with regard to the fairgrounds itself? What's the timeline that you're looking at to come back with some kind of answers?
Probably about 3 months out.
Okay.
To come back, and in the best of all worlds, we'd like to have that information.
Okay.
And if there was any way of getting that market, or even a phase one of that market work completed,
So
that'd be very helpful. The work program for that consultant becomes extremely important, that you're very specific about, so it isn't so generalized, it's of no use to you. We'd have to be very specific about what the answers we would want. And so if you got to a point where you were about to do this and do kind of a phase one piece of research, we'd be very interested in having a look at that work program and just commenting on it.
We've actually run into them and done some, for example, I believe they're the ones who did the feasibility study in our work in Lincoln.
Oh, did they?
And also, they're one of the firms that we recommended in Fairbanks to do a little bit of feasibility for their work too.
Right.
So George is right. It's
great.
Just in the work program. I think the strength for us is the siting, because frequently we can help inform the process as far as the actual siting of those locations.
Okay.
For instance, in Lincoln, they were asked the wrong question. And we did get in partway through it and reframe it, but it's really important that there's an important issue here having to do with the fairgrounds, and that one be addressed, and that be part of the work program, and the very special needs here, because you have a rather unique facility, and you'd want the work program to address and figure out how to enhance that.
Terrific.
So.
Well, then if we could work together, in that next phase, that would...
But that's something that needs to be done. I mean, when I'm hearing what we've heard this morning, and so far, is that the whole idea of an event center with Kim has been very good about the kind of the market you're looking at. I think there's no disagreement that that's really where you need to go.
As an exposition center.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I would hope that you could move on that rather quickly. And so I think this is really an interesting connection here.
Okay. Basically, that's what I wanted to say. We support it wholeheartedly and believe it's a great use for the property. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Ramona Holt, an area business person, concerned citizen. I wear many hats. I've been connected with the fairgrounds for probably over 60 years, longer than any of you have, and have a passion for it. My husband and I were instrumental in getting professional rodeo to Missoula, which it's been here for a number of years. Also, the development of many aspects at the fairgrounds as far as the agricultural and entertainment community. We promoted our own rodeo at our own fairgrounds for years, and then moved to the fairgrounds with the multi-purpose trade show connected with that. Of course, we were at the mercy of the weather, and sometimes that was good and sometimes it was bad. I do see through the we've seen the decline and the prosperity of things happen at the fairground. Now is the perfect time to make things happen. We're at a new crossroads in the community. The need for an exposition center is just past due. I've been a supporter of this concept for over 20 years, and I had told Kim that if it ever came back to the table, I would be here to help.
Yes.
So here longevity is good in that respect.
You're right. Yeah.
And I'm a member of the tourism community. I serve on several boards, state and nationally. And there is a need in Missoula. As Kim pointed out, we're on the route, the I-90. We can draw from all directions. If and when we get this type of facility, let's hope it is at the fairgrounds. That's where I would vote for it to be. But nevertheless, the right facility at the right place in Missoula is going to be unbelievable for economic development in the area. And so I'll be here until you plant me.
Thank you.
I'll pass.
Okay,
I
Scott?
just want to say thanks for coming this morning. All this information is going to be put to great use. We work closely with everybody that sits here, Midtown Chambers, UB. So we're excited about working with everybody in the future.
I'll pass.
I'm with the next group.
I'll pass. I will as well.
All right. Well, I think with that, unless anyone, and you can make an additional comment, but with that, I think we're adjourned, and thank you very much for coming out and giving us your insight, valuable information, and we look forward to seeing you again and continuing this discussion as we start developing alternatives.
Do you guys have email addresses that I can
You bet.
get from you?
Mine is on that response sheet too, if you want to write that or tear that off of the...
It's all right.
I'm George Crandall, and what we'd like to do is run around the table and have everyone introduce themselves. And to my left,
Donna Rambula from Crandall Rambula.
Kim Rickman from the Missoulian.
Kent Watson, part of the Central Park Committee. I'm Jeff Badnock. I'm part of the Central Park Committee. I was the MRA director for almost 20 years and sponsored both the ULI investigation of the ERD3 and created the ERD3 plan.
okay.
Larry Anderson, County Commissioner.
Bill Carey, County Commissioner.
Scott Peter, Fair Manager, and I did a little work with Central Park.
Peter LaGrosse with Central Park Committee.
Larry Farnes with Missoula County.
Dale Bickle with Missoula County.
And Jason Graff with Crandall Rambula.
And Peter, you have a presentation? Take it away.
I do have some visual references. You're going to see some references from a few presentations that are part of our history. And how much time do we have?
We've got an hour and 12.
Okay, so my goal is going to be to give this committee a synopsis of two things, of three portions of, you could say, study and intensive work that this committee has been a part of, and some of the general conclusions that have ridden through the 7 years we've been a part of this project. We'll try to do that as quickly as possible and then open ourselves up to the questions that may be helpful to you.
Okay.
So the presentation isn't a specific package for you. It's really some images that have come with us along the way that help us tell our story. So the birth of our group came in year 2000 when the Missoulian and other local businesses pulled together community members to brainstorm over the course of a year to award $60,000, I believe, to a vision that would make a difference 100 years from now. We'd be able to look back and say we planted a seed that flowered into something for our community. And I believe there were 100 and some odd community members that were pulled together for a series of charrettes, and probably 100 ideas came down to 4 that survived that and emerged as visionary objectives for the city that were awarded the money, and Central Park was one of those. I was a part of the whole process at that time, and as a citizen and as an enthusiast for this, there were several kind of awakenings that we went through of the way we perceived this land that brought it to its status of being awarded a community vision. And I want to touch on some of those. I think we realized as community members that the way we perceive not only the fairgrounds, but all of the land surrounding the fairgrounds is we perceive it as we perceived it out of habit. And when we looked at the history, which I'm sure you're familiar with in studying this, to see how did we end up with the fairgrounds here? How did we end up with racetracks here? How did we end up with a school here and different things that are there? We can see this is land that really kind of came together almost accidentally into its present configuration. It's land that used to be peripheral to Missoula, and stuff was just kind of put out there, and now it finds itself in the center of our community. How it has developed, when we got our heads into this, we became awake to the fact that land that's unplanned becomes fragmented, and while it can go to very good uses, it loses the opportunity for its use as a whole. And we see that fragmentation as a part of the history of this area, of not only the fairgrounds parcel, but the public lands as a whole. And the group became intrigued of looking at this land with the awareness of there's something very special here, and without proper planning, it's threatened to lose its highest and best use for the community. The contemplation of this land was an awakening of how valuable it is. The value of what 160 acres means in the middle of a community, or central to a community, is, even though we're blessed with open space around us and near us, wonderful parks surrounding Missoula, the significance of publicly held space of this together. This image right here and I should back up a step. At first, the question to the Vision 2000 committee became a question of should the fairgrounds stay or move, or what should happen to the fairgrounds? And in studying it, the value became the realization that we have 160 acres of publicly held land adjacent to each other. And the habit I was speaking to of the way we perceive this is we don't perceive this historically as one tract of publicly held land. We picture it in its parts. We picture the fairgrounds as a part. We picture the land controlled by the Parks Department as a part, the College of Technology as a part, the high school as a part. And by looking at it in its parts, there was a realization that we weren't seeing the immense value of this property as a whole. And when we considered the significance of 160 acres together in one place, and what it takes to assemble a parcel of that magnitude, we drew. Does anybody have a pointer that I can use? Well, I'm a matter of fact. But so, if we look at, as Missoulians, we know these neighborhoods between South Avenue and between Patty Street and between Bancroft and between Higgins, and if we imagine what it would take to assemble 160 acres that are in a residential area of our community, our perception of value goes from how much is land worth a square foot, to develop something land might be worth $8 a foot or $12 a foot or something like that, to, wow, to acquire and assemble a tract that large is really an infeasible possibility for a community like ours. So there became a real respect of this is not only the stewardship of kind of chunks of land that could be used in different ways, but its value to this community is as a whole. So one theme you're going to hear us talk about is through all of our processes over 7 years, probably the foremost consensus went to the idea that this land should be kept in its whole portion and looked at as a whole portion, and it should not be divested or used as a commercial benefit. Its value is really in the parcel as a whole. Park became kind of the word or the overriding theme for how this land would be treated, with a pretty loose definition of park. And why did park kind of captivate the members of the various committees that worked on this? Most simply put, because a park seeks to improve the quality of life of the citizens of its community. In addition to providing beauty and open space, and park creates the possibility for community. It seems to be an idea that all sections, all demographics of a community can benefit from if the land is used to its potential. As Missoulians, I think we have a pride of being drawn into community with one another, and if we look at the venues that we pride ourselves on as a community, our out to lunch, our various parks around town, we are a community that seems to be enjoy being drawn together with each other, and a park seems to be a value statement of that. We saw approaching this parcel as a park as visionary. We chose the name Central Park, not because this could become a replica of the Central Park in New York, but really as an honor of the vision that occurred in that city at that point in time. And when we look at Central Park in Manhattan as probably the most visionary park in the history of the world that I'm aware of, that under immense pressure of economic development and of hard times, such a large swath central to a community was dedicated for park functions, and now has created the most valuable real estate in the world surrounding it. And so we looked at that and really took inspiration from how can we be visionaries today that 100 years from now, or several hundred years from now, people could look back and say that was really a gift to our children. We look at extraordinary towns and cities in our country or in the world, and Missoulians, we pride ourselves in creating a place that's special, and we look at the examples that extraordinary cities have extraordinary public and common places, and we see this as an opportunity. We see the existing pieces that are there as the starting ingredients for a park. And from the time that this study was done, there have been wonderful additions, most notably the water features and the water parks of the Parks Department, the splash and the pools, and some additional ice features. But when we look at the uses that are already there, we think we have a good start to the ingredients of a park already. So I'm going to skip into this was kind of the mentality that emerged and was awarded funding, and a small committee was formed called Central Park Missoula, whose mission was not to try to define that vision, but to reach out to Missoulians, much in the way that you are right now, and say, Missoula, you have 160 acres. What is your dream for this land? And to try to educate our citizens so they had a starting point with which to contemplate this area, and then to invite their ideas. So I'm going to skip to So our study will take the form of two different phases. The first was to conduct a professionally facilitated charrette by inviting about 100 members of our community to spend a day together learning, drawing, discussing, dreaming, breaking into teams. And the invitees, I'm going to let Jeff take this section of it to talk about what happened during our first kind of charrette process.
Thank you, Peter. To conduct our charrette, we retained the services of Don McLaughlin, an architect from Bozeman, who is a pioneer of charrette and community-based planning. When I was a sophomore in high school, and that was some years ago, I attended my first charrette that Don's firm put on. So we were very strong believers in charrettes, just for the idea of being able to bring a lot of the community together. The way we conducted our charrette and selected the people is we had everyone on our committee nominate people, bring I think 10 names. Who do you think should be here? And then we put them all up on a bulletin board on cards. And we kind of categorize them. Are they business people? Are they retired? Are they children? Are they artists? Are they working people? And we sorted it out so that we were able to get what we thought was about as broad a cross-section of Missoula as possible. And so that's how we got to our list. And then we conducted, as Peter said, a day-long workshop and we mixed everyone up. Retired people were working with fifth graders on their teams, as they had people from the fair, they had people from the arts community. We just mixed the whole mess up. And then what we got are these products that Peter's about to show you. And as a planner and a practitioner in the area of urban development, nothing really delights me more than the democratic nature of inviting the community to tell you their ideas. And I applaud you for doing what you're doing today. If there's anything that's amiss here, it's that we're not all hearing everyone else's ideas, but you're hearing them. So, Peter, go ahead. Tell them about what our charrette came up with.
So it was remarkable to see a group of 100 people, and the stakeholders were all invited, by the way, as well as a part of this, is from the beginning of the day to the mentality that most of us came with of viewing these parcels in their fragmented pieces, to watching people dream of what if it's considered as a whole. And the wealth of ideas that came forth and were sketched out surpassed those ideas of the committee that had been thinking about this for years to start with. And many of them beyond probably what we might consider feasible or realistic, but all with common threads of things that really inspired kind of the next round. So it led to the next round where we have these wonderful ideas. Some of them are closer to reality or closer to near future reality than others. How can we distill those professionally and to a specific recommendation or set of recommendations? Design Workshops was a firm that was hired to take us on that next step, to take the charrette results and bring them to another level. So Design Workshops, who was already familiar with Missoula from other studies, spent quite a bit of time analyzing the site for all of its particulars, studying its uses, studying all of the demands of the particular parcels, and then reconciling those with the results from our charrette. We have a report that we're going to leave you with, which shows their method of study of from how much field use to what's going on at the fair with the different uses, what studies have been done by the fair on an event center and how might an event center, and I will mention, it was never presupposed in this committee's work whether a certain use should go or shouldn't go. It was really trying to create possibilities for people to make those judgments with. We have a choice of creating an efficiency or moving a use or whatever it is. So the function of this committee has really been to create choices. So in the design workshops process, not only did they conduct a thorough research of what's going on at the facility, but they also held a charrette process of their own that was a little bit more focused based on their research. They conducted their charrette at the facilities at St. Pat's Hospital. It was primarily focused on stakeholders with some outreach to the community to react to both the ideas that the kind of data showed of use and to further distill the ideas that had come from the charrettes. The conclusions or the kind of ideas that we're left with from design workshops is really the culmination of our committee's work to date. And what design workshops left us with is a series of 4 images just because of the nature of our process, and it's not trying to draw a single conclusion. They really left us with a series of images to inspire kind of the next round of process, ranging from kind of least ambitious to almost an underlying zoning. If everything were gone, here's what could happen. And so, Kent, I don't know if you can read this from where you are, but would you take us through the 4?
I've got my copy.
You've got your copy. If you'd kind of take us through the 4 designs and
Sure.
what they attempt to achieve.
And Jason, George, and Don have a copy of this. I gave them when they were here earlier, so they already have it in front of them. And just for the purpose of brevity, I'll just run very quickly through them. As Peter pointed out, there were 4 solutions ranging from the most developed to probably the least developed. And we've always looked upon these as a kind of a palette that one could draw from in order to create the most desirable park. And that's why a process like this is going to be extremely helpful. The option 1, really, the key ideas out of that I'll just outline very quickly. It was to reorganize the fairgrounds to be more into a more efficient configuration, to reconfigure the layout of the track, create a more efficient building organization on the north edge of the park, which would include a comprehensive plan for the College of Technology and Sentinel High School, which occupies sort of the northeast quadrant of the area. Combine baseball fields and soccer fields to allow for more flexible spaces. As a former Little League coach myself, I had some insight and understanding of those kind of conflicts and the fact that there's a period of time when things are very intensively used and the rest of the time they're not hardly used at all. So we were trying to incorporate that aspect into the planning. The addition of the great lawn and water feature in the southern portion of the park. Now bear in mind that this charrette in August of 2004 was before Splash Montana was built. So it was in the planning stages and we knew it was forthcoming. But so some of the images you'll see here that sort of ignore Splash Montana. And then finally the shared parking along the northern, eastern, and western edges of the park. And that was the option 1. The second option, very similar, but you can see some change just from looking at the graphic there. Once again, the key ideas were reorientation of the fairgrounds, a midway and major pedestrian spine as a central organizing element. It was long felt that one of the frustrating things about this space is there's no organizing element, and the importance of figuring out a way to develop an organizing element that would work for all the uses was a major key idea in this option 2. An amphitheater, retail restaurants, and other uses added to the center of the park. New shared parking along the edges, and again the reorganization of the playing fields, so there's a more efficient reorganization of those spaces. Option 3, a little harder to read.
In 2, where is the amphitheater here?
The amphitheater. See, I didn't realize this was going to be a test, George. Oh, there it is, right in the center.
Okay,
It's nestled between the 2. There you go. Yeah. It's been a while since I've looked at it myself. Option 3. Different sort of graphic altogether. Reorganization of the fairgrounds once again. Northern portion of the park into a campus-like mixed-use area, including expansion of the College of Technology. So basically, the northern third which is characterized by those dark brown buildings, is more or less a reorganized campus-like setting. Yeah.
Just one thing.
Sure.
What's interesting about this is yesterday we were having discussions about roads possibly through. This is a road through the facility.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Scott, because one of the things that shows up in I think all of them have to go back through, is the fact that could be put in there and opened when needed, but it would not be a thoroughfare otherwise unless there was some activity involved with the space where that had to be opened up. We certainly didn't want to create a through traffic route there, but we felt it was important to have access when it's needed through that quadrant of the park. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Scott. Okay, the other key ideas for the option 3, addition of a major east-west promenade and a sculpture walk-like space linking the two areas. So you see, basically at the bottom of that developed area, there's a major walkway that goes right along the southern edge of the sort of the campus-like development. Reorganization of the recreational fields once again, a new water feature and ponds in the southern portion of the park, and obviously with the existence of Splash Montana, that takes on a somewhat different character. But I think the concept, and this came out of the earlier charrette too, there's a lot of interest in water features beyond a splash facility. You know, some kind of a pond, some kind of a fountain, anything that would give this park a really distinctive water type of use. So that was one of the things that shows up well in this option. The addition of the Great Lawn as a central feature, and then a natural amphitheater in the center of the park in this case. And the amphitheater here is at the north edge of the Great Lawn. And then finally is option 4. This is the least developed option. And the key ideas are the large Great Lawn and lake as a central feature. So that really establishes the theme, if you will, for this space in this option. Removing most existing buildings and structures, informal meadows with recreational fields, a large water feature connecting to the central lake, a new formal meadow gardens in the northern section, and a new museum or cultural institution, and a new tavern on the green type of restaurant. So that's sort of the quick overview of the charrette options that came out of the design workshop process in August of 2004.
Jeff, can you speak to the mentality of why a study like this is even relevant today when we're not suggesting that buildings be scraped and high schools being removed and that sort of thing? Why do we have a drawing like this?
I think simply looking back at the history of our planning, since we started thinking about this great space in the heart of our community, we've seen a multi-million-dollar addition to the high school. We've seen Splash Montana go in. The city has put in a flood control project and basically made this into a catch basin. And what that tells us, and not to mention the considerations of the fair's future, what that tells us is that while we can have a vision that we hope survives 100 years and can come into fruition over the next century, things are happening all along in a vacuum, which goes back to Peter's one of his original themes. Things are happening in this area, and if there's anything that I think characterizes our concern is that we'll continue this pattern of development in a vacuum without thinking of the larger picture, and we will commit ourselves on an ongoing basis to what are acknowledged to be good uses. But this is the only place where we will have 160 acres in the central part of the city. We know that the college, the university, for example, is already contemplating moving the College of Technology into their South Campus. And what's going to happen is if we, as a community, have not engaged with the university, with the county, with the high school about the future of the College of Technology, something's going to happen there that's not going to be very visionary, that's not going to think about this whole area. So when we show a picture, I look at that and I say, I will never live long enough to see that. But Peter's children and his grandchildren may. We're not advocating that we do that, but if we want to have that for Peter's grandchildren, we have to settle on it today and start thinking in terms of creating a vision like that. That may not be the vision, but we're going to foreclose on it if we don't think that way today.
So a few things that I think kind of struck us about the process and some of the possible visions that emerged from our, it's amazing that we spent 7 years to come up with a series of drawings, but where this discussion starts, and as you can appreciate, the complexity and the cross ownerships and the different uses is really kind of a thoughtful series of conclusions. One of them, money always comes up. What can we do financially? What can this community afford? And early on, when we started to have this awakening of how we consider this land, and we realized we don't think of it all as one parcel. When we park at Splash, Montana, we don't think that we've parked on the same piece of land that houses the fair. We wouldn't think of walking that distance. Or if we park at the Y, we don't consider that we're at the same parcel that the high school's on. We would get out of our car and just drive. Just taking the step of thinking of this parcel as a whole and planning it as a whole, even with minimal funding, what can become, from the very first meetings we had, the idea of fewer fences and more trails, just letting the area connect is going to be the first step towards realizing this property's potential as a whole. The idea of efficiency, when we look at the idea of a cooperation between a high school and a parks department and the Y and the fair, or whoever it is there, the idea that there's so much space that's used for recreational purpose, and if those spaces can be organized, and I was in Manhattan just in October and walked the park with this idea in mind and seen, wow, here are spaces and fields that have been organized to offer multi-use and thereby freeing up other space for other sorts of use, and then watching the synergy that comes from that. So regardless of the pace of this project, the idea of it being thoughtfully organized is probably the most dramatic step that can lead to an immediate greater benefit of this area. The idea of treating this property with the respect of the value that it contains. When we choose to put an ice rink in, how are we going to think of an ice rink architecturally and where it will go? And when we drive past this as Missoulians, do we look at that and is there something that pulls us into it or makes us proud as citizens? And so just the way we go about placing uses in the area, I think is central to this. You can see the idea of how the fair buildings are organized. This committee was probably a good representation of the community in that we had members who never see the fair leaving and see it growing, and we have members who saw the fair perhaps taking a different course, and that really wasn't the focus to solve that issue, but the inspiration of if we're going to have a fair, if it's going to evolve into events facilities, that it be done in a way that is most efficient and most becoming to the property as a whole. There are a few themes that if we're to distill all the ideas and say these are the strongest voices we've heard over 7 years of citizens who've put their head into this and thought about it and drawn conclusions. There are a few, and some of them are redundant to things I've said. The first is consider and plan these parcels as a whole. Otherwise, we immediately lose their potential as a whole. So if there's one purpose that this committee would like to have influence the process. It's to steer it towards looking at the parcel as a whole as opposed to just the fairgrounds or just any of the other parcels. Number two is with an appreciation of the value of this is to not divest of this parcel or to not utilize it for economic gain. The awareness that regardless of what we can afford or can't afford today, the treasure that this is, the latent treasure for generations to come, is that we would be selling ourselves short if we were to fragment it or divest of any portion of it. You've seen in some of these drawings, there are commercial elements to them. There was, I think in option 3, there was a commercial series of commercial buildings. And I think the thought process of the community input that led to those wasn't for the sake of could we profit from that particular use. It was a way to imagine, whether it be an events facility or whether it be commercial uses brought into the park, that those were in the interests of the park, not in the interests of fundraising. Thirdly is to inspire a process that will lead to a joint city, county, and other stakeholders kind of surrender or organization of an overarching authority of this. I think when we see the kind of sub-authorities, again, it doesn't lend itself to this property being managed as a whole, but lends itself to being managed in parts. And so the foremost probably organizational recommendation that we can come forth with is that to encourage the city and the county and the other stakeholders to come together and create an overarching authority, whether we call it the Central Park Authority or whatever, that can then allow each of the stakeholders to focus on their particular mission. I think it was in support of the fair, for instance, if the fair isn't burdened with being the vision and the steward of this entire parcel, the fair can focus on running a first-class fair and utilizing its facilities the way they're best utilized. And that carries through for the other uses as well. Am I missing any? Or is that are those the primary conclusions that you think we can tell in our story?
No, I think you hit them. I think we're, if anything, we're a group that is interested in seeing that we don't foreclose on the future of this through planning that's less than mindful. I think about some of the things that have come before the county commissioners in land use planning, and for example, the consumption of arable land. And are we looking at a time in our history where we're going to change the way we deal with food? Are we going to try to grow more food? Well, if we are, then we need to have a fair that highlights, for example, local food production, growing food. We need to expand what the Extension Service does. We need to be able to showcase to the citizens how they can take on locally grown food. There's a lot of people who are doing that in Missoula, but it may be one of those things that's going to be more and more important as life goes on. So we want to make sure that when we think about reinventing the fair, whatever that may be, that we have it in the context of this space that is the heart of our community. And so that the fair gives back constantly, not just 1 week a year for the fair or the activities that the community makes of this land, but that we find a way to integrate the fair and the rest of the property so that it's giving back on a daily basis to the community in perpetuity.
I think a part of the kind of a point B to the thought of a planning body or an overarching authority was to create a plan today that is a plan for the long term. We all know that we're limited in what we can spend financially today, but to not let that be the limit of this land's vision. if the zoning is there, per se, the underlying zoning of here's what this is to become, then it will at least prevent its fragmentation. And as this community can fill in the vision and color the map in, it will take it at the pace that it can, but without a predetermined plan that says, okay, here's the process for anything going in, or as we can afford to, here are the pieces that are going to fill in, without that underlying zoning or that underlying plan, which is we're thrilled to see the process that's happening right now, obviously with the county commission and with your involvement. It's a step in that direction, which will hopefully lead to the conclusion in this direction. I think this committee can offer its service to the county, to the citizenry, to you. I think what we have behind us right now is we've engaged the community in so many different ways that we know we can pull people together, we know we can pull information, we know we can kind of take the momentum of our process over 7 years and bring community passion to whichever direction this ends up taking. So with that, I think we've left ourselves about 15 minutes to take questions or talk about these ideas or whatever.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you. Looking at the report, there was a voting between option 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and a preference indicated. Where are you with that anyway, or why was that preference developed, or what happened, or
What's the result of that?
Yeah. So if we were to look at these 4, and all great ideas, great concepts, can you give us a little more information so that if we thought option 4 was the best and no one voted for it here, we would know the reason?
Right. I can speak to a few points where I saw the preference barometer happen. The first one, and probably the most dramatic in my mind, was in the first charrette, where we had options that ranged from really turning that land into something like you see in Vision 2 or 3 here, versus kind of believing it the way it is. And we had 100 people participate in that one, and it's in our kind of first charrette book, and you can see there was a strong, probably 90% of the dots went on the most change that process resulted in, which was not the scraped park. It looked more something like this. And it gave us the sense that the community, when they see the value of this, wants it to be mature into something that's its potential. When we saw the meters being taken from this process, to be fair to that and drawing conclusions from it, there weren't as many people putting dots up in that to draw a far-reaching conclusion. I think there was a general enough kind of, even though 1, 2, and 3 are different, they're similar in that they really just present a reorganization of the lands that are there to take advantage of efficiency and preserve the whole. Versus number 4 didn't really emerge as an option that was being advocated. It was really the idea of every step of the way that you have a choice in Missoula to further develop or lessen the development in an area. Here's an alternative vision you can have in your mind as you go down that path. And so number 4 didn't get dots, I recall, because it really didn't impress any of us as today, as it did just a vision to refer to as we have choices along the way. So does that help your understanding of what we did?
Yep. Looking at the alternative, in option 1 or alternative 1, the racetrack is retained.
Right.
And that's the only one where it's retained. In option 3, which was received lots of votes, the fair is certainly more compact and up in the upper left-hand quadrant, with kind of a central organizing space. And what was the thinking about the track? Or did that come up? The racetrack?
I don't recall that it was a major item in that discussion. As Peter pointed out, it was a much smaller group that we had, with stakeholders and a few others that showed up for that process that Design Workshop conducted. So there again, we were focusing on the 160 acres and not trying to determine whether there should be racing or not, because we didn't want our vision to be clouded with what was obviously an emotional issue for a lot of people. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we ended up with it, showing it in an option, in this case, option 1. And as I mentioned at the outset, I think the whole idea was we're creating a palette from which ideas can be drawn based upon these various options.
And I think there was a respect to how emotional those issues were. And in that given year, the idea of the racetrack, the racetrack is going to go, the racetrack should stay, the racetrack is going to be expanded. There was such a kind of debate going on in the racetrack and fair community itself that, as Kent said, the committee saw its strength as showing the community. We saw so many times those questions being put out to the community without an alternate. When we started our process, the most common question out there was, should the fair move? Some people would say no, but it was not asked as here's an alternative. It was just asked almost as a vacuum. Same thing with the racetrack. Should the racetrack? Well, unless we see a choice as citizens of here's what we could gain if it left, and here's what it could look like if it stayed, that's really what we saw as our purpose, is to present options to choose from rather than to ask that question as an isolated question.
Again, it goes back to the idea of mindfulness. If we don't think about it in a mindful way, we're going to get what one of our early participants called the balkanization of this public land. It's been divided up such that one day when I was out there walking around, I saw that there was an 8-foot-high chain link fence around the high school, a narrow driveway, and an 8-foot chain link fence around the park. And it occurred to me we had 2 chain link fences dividing public uses. And it struck me as rather odd that that kind of development had taken place that way. That if I wanted to use some part of the open space of the high school and some part of the park on a walk, I would encounter 2 chain link fences that were, 15 or 20 feet apart. It just didn't make sense. So that, if nothing else, this exercise appeals to me, and I think to Peter and to Kent and the rest of us, as a call for the community to be mindful. Think about this and look at our alternatives and recognize that we can have whatever vision we want. But absent that mindful planning, we'll get none of it. We'll get nothing.
Sure. The question, your experience with the Urban Renewal District is like, you've been pretty comprehensive in thinking about the things within the border of this. And what are your views as part of the relationship of the URA3 in relationship to this? Because these drawings don't show a lot of that. If you're talking about being mindful, what's the mindfulness of this site in relationship to that redevelopment agency? And what, obviously, you've been intimate in that over the past.
When we started our redevelopment plan downtown, we had along with us, it's kind of the back of the business card idea. One of the things that we were charged with doing was to enhance the public's visual and physical access to the river. It was a statement that was that simple that guided everything that we did with respect to the river, the parks, the trails, the accesses, the cover, the crossings. All those things were just all housed in that one simple sentence. If there were anything that I would suggest for this part of the community with respect to redevelopment would be to come up with a simple back of the business card mission statement with respect to what we've called the Central Park area. Something that spoke to redevelopment in that area and how it would address this. It's certainly not going to address all parts of the 3rd Urban Renewal District. It's not going to be part of it. But the waves of influence that are going to come out of a mindful planning of this area are going to affect all up and down Brook Street.
And this was actually addressed to some extent in the report. If you turn to page 20, there's the problem-solving component and part context. And there was actually a plan, which didn't end up in here, that Kurt from Design Workshop developed, which was pretty revolutionary in terms of a parking structure outside the edge of the park someplace that the Midtown community, the commercial community, could be part of, as well as helping solve some of the parking problems for the park. It doesn't appear in here because as a structure now, at that time, in that area would have been like, pretty controversial, so it didn't appear in the final report. But those kind of concepts were considered in this total context, that, Central Park is really in the middle of this Midtown area, and what happens there is going to greatly impact what could happen around it.
The other question I have is now through the lens of all these other changes that have occurred recently, as far as, we've heard land deed restrictions and water retention areas and Splash Montana and, all these things that you've said is, this parcelization and not think of this as a larger whole. These projects have their own little lives of their own. Would you think any of these options a little bit differently, knowing that there is some, if not short-term, at least mid-term commitments to these sites as far as, you've made $1 million investment, that's not going to go anywhere. Does that change your view of how you would look at these three, sort of mid-range aggressive options?
Well, $1 million investment or $2 million or whatever, that kind of investment isn't going to go away tomorrow. It's not going to go away in 10 years or 20 years. But it may go away in 30 and it may go away in 50. Once the structures or improvements that have been made have gone through their life cycle. If they exist today, for example, the water retention project, that's a given now. And it's pretty important to the entire community. Well, if that is a new given that this area has to deal with, then let's move forward planning on it being there and incorporating it, rather than when the retention pond plan was put together, did they think how it would affect the fair? Did anyone think how it would affect any part of the use of that land in the long term? If we have a major lake feature at some point in the future, and we have a big spring runoff, we're going to have to figure out how those two work together. So I guess the idea is that thinking for 100 years is much different than thinking about next year or 5 years. Because none of us in this room are apt to be enjoying it. And we all know the saying, the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. Well, if we're going to be those people for our grandkids, we're going to have to do that now. And if we fail to do it, what are they going to be left with?
We asked this question the last meeting, in the urban renewal area, are there any plans that we ought to be aware of that would, because we're going to look at the red area, and we're going to make some assumptions about how that might develop over a period of time, because it'll inform us about the fairground site. Is there anything going on there that we should be aware of other than the planning work that's been done so far? Any projects that are hot or look like they have a high probability that would skew things?
I don't know. Ellen needs to be here.
I think that you can see so many areas that are not, they don't have dense residential component, or they're kind of ripe for more dense residential component. And the idea, going back to the mission statement at the beginning of why this term we're using loosely as a park, well, the idea of offering something that doesn't just consider itself, here's a one-time a year, or here's for teenagers who are in a ball club, but creating an area that reaches out to as broad of a demographic as possible, plays to the idea that this is going to become a more densely populated area. It's going to become more urban.
And if this is preserved as a place where people from all walks and demographics are drawn to, then it really becomes the central park not only to Missoula, but of the district we're talking about. Commercially, we can imagine with an amenity of a maturing park, the motivation to invest, the motivation to develop residentially more densely is going to play to that amenity.
Remember that well, certainly in my lifetime, we're sitting where the airport was. And that's a lot of things have happened in 50 years to change the community. Who knows what will happen? We may have a spaceport there in the next 50 years where people will once again reintroduce transportation from there. I don't know how it works. But that's a big change, and it's a long time.
So no one will be offended if we come back and with some assumptions about the red area as to how that would evolve over time, because it will inform us about being an urban renewal area. There's things that can go on there that probably will happen there that will inform us about then the fairground site and the park concept. So, I mean, that's really what we're getting at. It appears it looks like it's okay to mess around with it for us to make some assumptions at this point, the red area.
I think that you could probably, over the life of the project, expect that the red area will change.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be wrong to assume it isn't going to change.
Well, someone assumed that by making it an urban renewal area. Yeah, that it's and what you want to do is encourage drastic change in one of these areas. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it comes back to one of your earlier statements about Central Park. It's not only the park, it's about what's happening on the edges. I mean, that's what made that land valuable, was the park. And I think it's, it wasn't in the vacuum where they thought about the park itself, but, Manhattan was developed on the edges to allow them to get that. I mean, not necessarily that's what's going to happen here, but, to look at this as a park without thinking about the edges is just not going to really explore the value or the benefits of what can happen within the park. So you need to look outside to understand what goes inside.
We're about the end of our time, and I want to, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very, very helpful to hear you talk about it, hear all of you talk about it, and compliment you on really all the great work you've done, because it will inform us as we move forward. So this is very valuable, and we share your concerns. So thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure.
Coming out this morning and giving us your time. Why don't we go around the table and introduce ourselves. I'm George Crandall from Crandall Arambula.
I'm Don Arambula from Crandall Arambula.
Steve Schultz with the Historic Preservation Committee. Philip Macklin, Historic Preservation Office. Doug Hacker, Preserve Historic Missoula.
Jennifer Anthony, Preserve Historic Missoula.
Janine Kaywood, Preserve Historic Missoula and the Montana Preservation Alliance.
Dan Hall with Preserve Historic Missoula.
Cynthia White, I'm with the Historic Preservation Commission.
Phil Carey, County Commissioner.
Larry Anderson, County Commissioner.
Jerry Marks from the Extension Office.
Fair Office.
Scott Meter, Fair Manager. Eric March, Missoula County. Jason Graff with Crandall Arambula.
What we've been doing in these meetings is to make a brief presentation to give you an idea about what the process is, or the process we're following, and then open it up to questions, and then go around the table and request that everyone make a comment or give us some ideas about your issues and inform us. And we have a response sheet, which Jason, I think, has handed out to you, and we would like you to identify your top issues and concerns. We'll take that information and crank it then into the planning process as we go on through. And there's a sign-up sheet which also
Did everybody get that?
Goes around. And Having said that, let's do this brief presentation and we can move through it very quickly. Jason, would you like to do it this time?
Sure.
We're trying to break it up because some people have been sitting in a number of these meetings, and so Jason gets to make the presentation this time. Go ahead.
So we came here yesterday. We've been through a series of meetings, as George mentioned, with a variety of different groups, and we're glad to have you all here today. We certainly know that there's a variety of structures here that have historical significance in the community. So the agenda is basically to give you a quick summary of the process that we'll be going through. We're basically going to be working until about April or May, and there's a second phase, which I'll talk about. But we really want to get your input and your thoughts on the fair site and this 160-acre study area, which I'll be showing you in a moment. This is a context drawing, obviously, downtown to the north and where the fairgrounds sort of fits into this larger picture of Missoula. This is a study area that's part of our task, is looking at this area within the red boundary. Of course, we have the fairgrounds, College of Technology, school sites, Splash Montana Parks. Most of you, all of you are familiar with that. The project purpose here is, I'll let you take a look at that, but obviously is to make the fair financially sustainable, to expand its user base, and to retain some of the traditions that the fair has provided for your community for a long period of time. We have a response sheet which I've passed out to you, and we'd love to get your comments verbally, but also written down so that we can have that in our back pocket and use that as we move forward in coming up with alternatives. So who we are, we're a firm from Portland, Oregon. We're a small firm. We work revitalizing American cities and also Canadian cities, but we work across the country, and we have a real passion for cities. We've worked on your downtown plan, as I see many familiar faces here today. We're just about wrapping that up. We have experience with other fairs in Salem. This is a project of our state fair. We've also worked in Lincoln, Nebraska, another state capital. And the process for this project, it's basically two phases. It's starting and designing work here in this upper portion, where we're basically gathering background information and getting our hands around the existing conditions and also your issues and concerns regarding the fair and this larger site that we saw previously. We'll come back with a series of alternatives. Here we are today, December, that should say 2 and 3. It says 3 and 4. First phase, starting background information, meeting with you all. We'll come back and develop 3 conceptual alternatives, and that will be roughly in around April. We'll get feedback on those alternatives, and we'll develop a preferred alternative, come back and present that to the public and also for the county consideration. We've looked at some of the prior planning that's gone on with regards here to the fairgrounds site only. This is a plan from 1989, and this informs us on ideas for the fair as they've evolved over time. We've also looked at the park's master plan of 2004, which had some suggestions for Playfair Park and improving access and circulation around that facility, linking Splash to the playground. We're also aware of the Fair Commission study in 2007. There were 3 concepts identified. This is concept 1. I think concept 3 was one of the preferred alternatives, and roughly it was an 87,000 square foot exhibition hall that was identified for the site. And you see basically a full reorganization of the fairground facility. The Central Park concept, we met with these folks just prior to this meeting. They've identified several alternatives, but basically reorganizing the fair site, creating a ball field, larger park area on the southern portion, and developing some type of College of Technology or school or public learning center on the northeast side. These were the key ideas that came out of that. The existing conditions. You're all pretty familiar with this. Residential neighborhoods surrounding the larger 160-acre site, the fairgrounds, playgrounds, and school facilities. We've taken a look at the major routes. How do you get in and out of the fair? We know that's been a large issue. Obviously, Russell and Brooks are your main conduits in the area. We've looked at traffic counts. This informs us on a couple things. Where are the major routes? What might be the difficulties in terms of pedestrian or other users who want to try and access the site. But basically, this gives us a sense of how do you get in and how do you get out? We've looked at existing bus routes, so other alternative transportation modes that bring people to the fair in a larger study area. Also the existing bike routes. We've looked at zoning. Parcels basically under a park zoning, but we know we also have a lot of commercial with Southgate Mall and residential surrounding that, so it informs us on how the outlying areas interact with this large green parcel. We know there's an urban renewal district 3 has been identified in the red zone. We're here, the study area in the dashed red. We need to be aware of how the URD will expand and grow over time and what relationship redevelopment here has with the fair and the larger parcel, which is our study area. So we need to, I guess, move beyond this little box here and encompass those areas that surround it. The URD is going to be a tool for redevelopment in the south side of town, and how can that work with the fair. We've looked at how the fair is used throughout the year. We know we have the week of the fair, but there's also a variety of other uses. We had a tour of the site yesterday, and so we know that buildings are used for a variety of different things throughout the year. And I think the idea is to better utilize that. And now we come to the point of your issues and concerns. So I'll hand it over to George.
So, questions you might have for us before we hear from you. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Yes.
Have you come to, you said you listed a number of things you've already looked at. Do you have any, are you drifting toward conclusions that would provide context in any of those areas, such as transportation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We know nothing. We're a blank slate. We're waiting for you to inform us. So.
I heard you're looking at options beyond the site, beyond moving the fair out before probably some other locations. If those tend to be workable options, does that mean the focus of this whole process is going to head out to wherever the fair ends up? Or is the focus of this process on this ground and what to do with it, with or without a fair?
The focus initially is on this piece of ground. To not assume that the fair is going to go anywhere, and to do our very best then with the site, and then only after that piece of work is finished, then say, all right, now should we look at moving the fair? Is that something we want to look at? But we think that just confuses the process at this point, so that would be a phase 2.
Why such a large boundary? Who designated the area of the study?
I think the county designated the area of the study, and it would have been our recommendation that they do that simply because that's all in public ownership. It seemed like a very logical thing to do for all that public ownership.
And there's been a bit of history of that's been generally the study area that some parks work and some Central Park is. So it's a little bit of consistency. If anything, we think it's important to maybe even look a little bit beyond that into the urban renewal agency area, which isn't part of our official study area, but we need to do that, to think of it as more comprehensively.
There was we referred to the park study, and basically that's the study area they used as well. So it seemed to us that made some sense. You'd already decided that maybe it should be looked at as a unit.
Knowing that even short term, there's some actions that may result College of Technology possibly moving out of there. And so we need to have some answers in the relationships of how these work together.
Yeah.
What kind of materials have you given about the history of the fairgrounds? Do you have anything
Not enough.
in hand?
Not enough. We toured the site yesterday, went into all of the buildings, and you've got some pretty remarkable buildings here, but we don't have enough.
We don't have enough. We've seen lots of photos and things like this. We know it's been an airport at one time, was one time out on the edge of fringe of town. Now that it's through growth in the region, now it's more centrally located. So, but that's about it.
Go ahead.
Preserve Historic Missoula prepared a draft eligibility study for the National Register of Historic Places. And we took that draft document, presented it to the State Historic Preservation Office and the State Historic Preservation Office Review Board. And the recommendation was that the fairgrounds should be considered as eligible for the National Register. And there are a variety of reasons why we've come to that conclusion. But we think that it's important that the people of Missoula and Western Montana understand that we're talking about a National Register eligible property here, and that this is important, and that should be part of the process and the dialogue. And Janine's got a copy here that we'd like to give you.
We'd love to have a copy.
Planning process.
Yes.
And please remember that it is a draft. There's still work to be done on it, but
Well,
I think
that fits right in with our work. We always
So
say
we
it's a
have this
draft.
for you.
Yeah, until it's, So
We have that for
we would appreciate having that copy.
And I think what Preserve Historic Missoula would like to do is go ahead and complete this draft with the building descriptions and everything that's needed to obtain a determination of eligibility from the keeper in the Washington office, from the keeper of the National Register. And not just stop at the state level, but go ahead and send it on to the keeper.
Any other questions? We have some questions for you, and I would like to go around the table. I would like you to inform us about these buildings and which ones you think are significant at this point. And I know you're ready to do that. So.
and beyond buildings, know that you're looking at National Register, there's significant site things we need to.
The racetrack was the first improvement built on the fairgrounds, so that's definitely on our list.
Would you like to come up to the front here?
I can come up to the front and just quickly...
We could put it right on the
magic drawing board.
board here, I think. Let's see if we John King's magic map.
Yeah, just maybe just laying it up on there.
Can we sit it right here?
Yeah, it looks like there's
Let me move it. There we go. Jason, give us a white background. Give us a, because it was really showing up beautifully there for a moment. It's an amazing projector.
Okay, that's better. I think that works.
This is just this one
There
board.
we go. Yeah, there we go.
This is just a board that I put together showing some of the resources, showing at least the fairgrounds site, and then showing the proposed, this at that time was the proposed plan that the Fair Board had commissioned CTA to put together. And then this is the Sanborn Fire Insurance map. And I think it's one of the things that's pretty interesting is how much of this site in particular is intact. Even though some of the buildings are gone, the actual physical site with these important open spaces, the maintenance building, clearly the commercial building, which is kind of a remarkable structure. Get on this side. And the culinary building, which is sort of a partner building, are important. What's colored in here are what's intact at this point, and I'm happy to leave this with you. These are also comments, and they're comments from the public from this last fair. I have on the back comments from the previous fair, and they really run the gamut. From horse racing, the best part of the fair, to move the fairgrounds out of here, to why isn't there enough parking? And so it's a real balance, I think, in terms of what the community thinks about it. But what seems fundamentally important is the physical space, and particularly in the context of this community that is now, Missoula County's now almost 100,000 people. That's getting to be big. For Montana, it's the second largest. And in that, this entire space, and indeed the space that you're looking at, is really significant central open space. The structure is still intact, And what's important there is as much the open space that's here and the racetrack itself as it is the buildings. It's the physical space that is so interesting because there are so many different uses for it, and it remains sort of a viable physical element with multiple opportunities for different kinds of things, from rodeo to car shows. So that's in itself significant. And again, I'm going to leave it there and let other folks talk about it. But I think it's helpful to take a look at it in terms of its context, and it's clearly in the context of the 160 acres that you're looking at. Its physical structure is really important. And whatever happens to the fair can become the framework for what goes on in terms of additional buildings that might be built, or even completely different uses, so that the structure remains there and the story remains there. Seems to be important, at least from my perspective.
We had heard, I guess we didn't hear, or maybe we read that there was a thought that the commercial building could be moved.
It wasn't our thought.
Pardon?
It wasn't our thought.
Well, we assume that didn't come from you. But we know that it apparently doesn't have a foundation, and do you know what the thinking was there?
I couldn't tell you. We weren't really part of that process.
Okay.
But I think if you look at the building, it seemed to me, from my limited experience in watching buildings get moved, it would take about 1,000 people to pick it up and literally walk it somewhere. And it would be very tricky, because if you look at the structure, it's if the side goes out, the top comes in.
Sure.
And then you can't put it back together again. Right.
Well, we've worked with people who move big buildings, and so I wondered whether anyone had talked to those people.
Yeah,
and they know.
The building's much larger than this.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I think that what happened was they recognized that there was going to be a fight over that building, so by moving it, they were, quote, preserving it.
Okay.
And so that's why that was the one building that was going to be saved.
Sure. We also we toured the building, and I mean, the commercial building is a wonderful building, and noted that, of course, being the old building, it isn't fire sprinkled, and it is a public space. And we asked about that and said, "What's its deal?" And we were informed that certainly the fire department has been really wonderful about cooperating, and they station a fire truck on the site during the fair, so that if there's any fire sprinklers around, and people are informed about what to do if there's a fire. But the reason I'm asking this question, do you have any, if someone said that needs to be sprinkled at some point, what would be your thoughts about that?
Not at all, no problem.
That's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there are several misconceptions I think we want to address. And I think the first one is this concept of change. And the preservation community isn't opposed to change. We're not opposed to development. What you're talking about, the sprinklers and the fire and the public safety, all of these issues are important. But there are ways to address those issues in such a way that the historic fabric of the fair is kept intact. And we don't want to be coming across as opposed to anything. We just want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about is a historic resource, and there are ways to do these things.
Good. Okay. So let's go around the table and hear from people. We'll start right here. You can pass, by the way, and then you can come back later on.
Well, there may be other people who can state it better than I can, but basically what Dan was alluding to is we have a really well intact set, kind of a hole there, that we're concerned about from a historical perspective. We're not opposed to change, we're not opposed to refinement, to redevelopment, but we want to make sure that the preservation of the place and the story is one of the main factors that goes into the consideration of those changes. And we believe it to be fully possible to incorporate that into any changes in any future that the fair has. So that's kind of the general principle we're working on. And even if uses change, we'd like to basically kind of be able to leave our footprints in the sand. So if that building no longer is the commercial building, gets used for something else, well, that's okay, but we can leave it there, and kind of the memorialize the use in some way, but keep using it in a new fashion if necessary. Or use the racetrack, the footprint of the racetrack. If horse racing is gone forever, we can still use that as maybe an organizing principle for the site. Make it the Midway or a Paseo or something, so that even if it's paved over, it retains its shape. And, Grandpa can tell grandson, great, we used to sit in the stands right over there, and that's where that guy fell off his horse that I told you about, and the stories are still triggered by what's left.
Good.
Yeah, I think the continuity is something that's really, really interesting, and I'm afraid part of what I have to do is explain the story. And we've walked around the downtown and talked a little bit about, it. I think the story is pretty interesting long-term in terms of Missoula's history, and it can be there no matter what happens. And I've said enough.
Okay.
When buildings are moved out of their native habitat, they invariably lose a good amount of their historical integrity. And we have numerous examples of that here in Missoula. We had a large mansion, the Greeno Mansion, near Greeno Park, which borders the north side of Interstate 90. And when that was moved, it was taken about 3 miles and was parked up at the top of a new golf course in the South Hills area, a place called Farviews. And it looked sort of like a lonesome urchin up there in this totally alien environment. And we've had a number of cases like that. We have an A.J. Gibson building, which is on Southwest Higgins, surrounded by numerous buildings that have probably gone up in the last 20 or 30 years. But this is a historical treasure, but looks totally out of place set up in this area here. You can't create history. History is, and history occurs because of a passage of time. And the people of this community have shown a reluctance to embrace new things or things that have been reworked. We used to have a very successful basketball program at the University of Montana before football kind of reared its head. And in those days, it was known as the Adams Fieldhouse and drew about 9,000 people, between 85 and 109,000 per game. The university spent $13 million to totally rehab it, turn it around, change the direction by 90 degrees, facing of the court and everything. And there was a lot of resistance. People said the word that I heard more often than anything else was antiseptic. And I'm afraid that to some degree it would be